Good morning. This is Faith in Our Hometown, brought to you as a community service and sponsored by Mercy Hospital, Joplin. And now, here's your host, Father Jay Friedel.
Good morning and welcome back to Faith in Our Hometown, our weekly discussion about issues that concern us as people of faith in the greater Joplin area. We're glad you joined us for another Sunday morning. And my guest this morning is going to be Tracy Borgmeyer, who is the resident ethicist, and there's a fancy word for a Sunday morning, at Mercy Hospital. And Mercy, again, just in all fairness, is our sponsor. But what we'd like to talk about this morning is something that involves all families at one point in time or another. And that is the fact that all of our families have people in them who sometimes have to struggle with health issues that might bring them closer to the end of their natural lives, or just even our elderly coming to the end of their natural lives. And so we're going to talk a little bit about today, how do we care for those people? And what are the principles that I think maybe should hold dear while we're caring for those people? So we're going to be back to talk about that right after this Mercy Minute. So grab a cup of coffee, come on back, and join us for a discussion about how we care for those people that we love at the end of life.
When they discovered there was no hospital, the Sisters of Mercy built one, as they had so many times before, offering healing and hope on the edge of the frontier. Mercy continues to answer the same call, to bring care wherever you or your child need it most. Mercy, in every era, your life is our life's work. Learn why we serve at mercy.net/legacy. A new baby changes the world and each of us. The Sisters of Mercy devoted themselves to offering exceptional maternity and delivery care, training generations of nurses to do the same. Mercy continues to answer the same call, to not only care for your baby, but to cherish them too. Mercy, in every era, your life is our life's work. Learn why we serve at mercy.net/legacy.
Well, again, thanks for joining us for another Sunday morning. My guest this morning, Tracy Borgmeyer, who is the resident ethicist here at Mercy Joplin. So, Tracy, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to say, tell us what an ethicist is and what an ethicist does.
Oh, okay. An ethicist is a person who has studied specifically the moral and ethical commitments that are inherent in a particular realm of work. So there are people who study business or professional ethics. Healthcare ethics is a particular discipline within medicine, a particular discipline within healthcare, that really what we do is we facilitate the difficult decision making that happens between physicians, providers, patients, their families and loved ones, and members of the healthcare team.
Now, how did you get into this job? Because, I mean, you're not like a priest or religious or anything. You're a lay woman who works at Mercy. How'd you get into this position?
My beginning with this actually came through social work. I was an oncology social worker for many years, and then moved into a position with Mercy in palliative care. So had a lot of experience working with patients and families, dealing with difficult decisions and very difficult emotions, and sometimes conflicting obligations about what is the right and best thing to do, making decisions for patients around very serious advanced illness and then at the end of life.
Yeah, so that's really what we're here to talk about this morning, is how do we care for our loved ones, Catholic or not,
Right.
At the end of life. How do we make some of the best decisions that involve the patient and all those who are trying to take care of the patient, their families, the people who love them, the doctors, the nurses, the institutions, whether they be nursing homes or in one's home or whatever. How do we help make all those decisions? Yeah.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because you bring up an important aspect of this, and that is that while we're a Catholic healthcare facility, we take care of people with all faith backgrounds.
Sure.
And no particular faith background, even people who have no religious preference. And our body of co-workers and physicians is all made up of people with all different faith backgrounds,
Right.
and none too.
Yeah.
So we do have the challenge of caring for people in a way that is still resonant with their beliefs and values,
Right.
even though there are certain moral commitments that we make in Catholic healthcare.
Yeah.
Certainly, you know, where do you begin? Because moral theologians have written whole volumes and whole classes are taught.
And I just really want to tell you that we're not going to have that kind of
Right.
discussion this morning, because otherwise all of you would be sleeping in your cup of coffee, because I mean these things are heady, okay?
But I can make it simpler.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
So-
That's why you're here.
Yeah.
'Cause we're just going to talk about it in our hometown version of doing this today.
So where we begin is that we believe that life is a sacred and precious gift from God. So that's where we start, and we believe that all persons, regardless of their medical condition, their abilities, have inherent dignity and worth, and are deserving of our care, our protection, and our respect. So if you begin there and you're guided by that, then it helps you to get, you know, where you need to go in terms of those really difficult decisions that have to be made.
Yeah, and I'm going to just give a little example. Here's my favorite one of recent history. You know, when I was younger, if somebody was in a state where they couldn't communicate anymore, we would then start to use what I have come to determine were really kind of derogatory terms, like saying that they were a vegetable, or even, I don't even like the term, in a vegetative state. Because what that does is that starts to almost give everybody the indicator that says, well, they're not human anymore. And that's the farthest thing from the truth about what we really believe in terms of that inherent dignity. Somebody doesn't just suddenly lose their humanity as a human being because they can't communicate anymore.
No.
Or because they are not registering on a machine that measures whatever they want the machine to measure. That person's still a person in that part, at that point in their lives. Even if their capacity is somehow a little less diminished, their humanity is not diminished.
Absolutely. And you know, we accept that God designed us as mortal people. We are vulnerable, we're fragile, we're subject to illness and injury. Most of the time we can hope for healing from an injury and healing from an illness. Our society and medicine, science, has brought about amazing medical technology that has truly been life-saving and life-changing, life-transforming. You think about things like heart bypass surgery, kidney transplant, things that people have and go on to live lives that sometimes are even healthier than before. I mean, sometimes resuming function. Today, in just focusing on care at the end of life, we're dealing more with what are some of the difficult things that we face as families and loved ones, because we now have all these options for care. One of the difficult things that we deal with is that we have sort of two extremes. On the one hand being medical overtreatment, treatment that becomes very burdensome without patients experiencing much benefit from that. And on the other hand, as we've seen across the nation really, movements to legalize physician-assisted suicide or hasten dying. And so either of those extremes present ethical moral challenges for us. Catholic moral theology has given us a gift of some common middle ground, a middle moral ground where we can care for patients without lapsing into either of those extremes. Recognizing that our lives are a gift from God, but that there is not an absolute obligation to prolong life beyond where the patient is experiencing some benefit from that.
Yeah, and I mean, let's just put this in even more, even simpler terms. All right, so what you're talking about, those two extremes would be like, for one, saying, okay, let's go ahead and do, something that's going to, prolong a person's, in some ways, their suffering, but not really ever going to cure them.
Right.
So what do we do? Do we do the treatment anyway? Like, do we have the, do we do the surgery on the 95-year-old person,
Right.
or do we say, hey, this is, even if we do the surgery, it might not work, but do we, how do we let this person in some ways allow them to die with dignity and in a regular course, rather than just prolonging it for the sake of prolonging it? So that'd be the one extreme, okay? And the other extreme would be to say, well, grandma's going to die anyway, so let's just go ahead and push her over the edge. Let's just go ahead and, and in effect euthanize her,
right.
because, well, we know she's going to die in the next couple of weeks anyway, probably. So let's
Sure.
just go ahead and put her out of her misery, or put her out of our misery, or whatever. Those would be the two extremes you're talking about
Right.
there.
And
right.
either of those are problematic for different reasons.
Right.
So when we look at
That's
medical
when people
ethics,
like I start waving flags in the room going, stop,
Right.
Yeah.
One of the first commitments of sound medical ethics is sharing of information and truth-telling and honesty with patients and their families, because good decision-making begins with good information. If we don't have all the information, if we don't know all we need to know, we can't really make good decisions because we're missing important pieces of those facts. So sharing information about the patient's condition, sharing information about their prognosis, different treatment options, what we expect from those options, and then also being honest about the things which are uncertain, the things which we don't know, because we also have to be honest about medical uncertainty and,
Sure.
and what we don't know.
Yeah.
So that's one of the first commitments that we make when working with people through decisions that are before them. The other thing that we think about when we talk about hasten dying is that there's the potential there in every day and every hour for gifts of life that belong to that patient, about which that patient may make a claim, and sometimes it's their family members. If we hasten the dying process, we rob people of that precious time that good things may still come from. The other part of the problem with hastening the dying process is that it involves other people. And so we're involving other people in something that then expands the moral dilemma. It's not just about the decision I make for myself. I've now involved my family. I've involved healthcare professionals who have moral distress about the care they've provided to their patients and want that to be valid, beneficial, doing no harm, but not robbing them of any good they still may experience, which we know about advanced stage illness. People still experience a lot of good, important times in that.
Yeah, I guess kind of the way that I've explained that to people in those moments is like, okay, especially when we know that we're very near the end of life. I always say, well, the window is opening here, and we know that we're at that point. Now, what we want to do is we want to allow this person to live until it's time for them to go.
As well as they can.
As well as they can, and with as much comfort as they can, and all those things. And we are going to get back to palliative care in a minute, but in the meantime, we're also not going to, do anything that would keep that process from being natural. And kind of, again, for those of us who believe in God, that has to be part of God's decision too, as to when that's actually going to happen. So we allow that to happen with dignity, rather than us being God and saying we're going to do this or not do this or whatever. That has to be part of the organic thing. My guest this morning is Tracy Borgmeyer. We're talking about end of life and care for people at the end of life. This is Faith in Our Hometown. We're going to be right back after a quick break, so don't go away.
You're watching Faith in Our Hometown on KSN TV, brought to you as a community service and sponsored by Mercy Hospital, Joplin.
Well, again, thanks for joining us this morning for another episode of Faith in Our Hometown. We're glad you're with us on a Sunday morning. So, my guest this morning, Tracy Borgmeyer, we've been speaking about how do we care for those people we love at the end of life, at the end of how that works. And so there are certain things that we can do, even though we would not want to play God, and we talked about that before the break. And we certainly don't want to either treat, and we certainly don't want to hasten death.
Right.
What can we do for folks in that situation?
You know, I think there are several things, and for one thing, it is important for people to think about who would make decisions for them if they were unable to make their own decisions. And this is something that we can all think about at any stage of health. We don't have to wait until there's an illness to think about, who do I most trust, who knows best my values, my beliefs, my preferences in terms of treatment, and doing a durable power of attorney, completing a durable power of attorney, and appointing someone who would speak for you if you ever became incapacitated. And then another thing that I think we need to remember is that God really designed our bodies to do amazing things. The way our immune systems work when we are sick, or we have found a lot of things that we can do to help the body fight infection or help the body recover from an injury. But you think about something like childbirth. God designed the body to do amazing things at the beginning of life and at the end. So we have found some ways that we can support the natural dying process and make it a little bit easier, but we really need to interfere very little in most processes. There are some illnesses which amount to more pain, some illnesses which create more shortness of breath or anxiety. So I think just recognizing that our bodies were designed for this. Many of us these days have had very little experience with seeing our grandparents or great-grandparents cared for at home.
Right.
And passing away through just a very natural process. A lot of people haven't really had that experience.
Right.
If people
kind of moved it out of the home and more into hospital or nursing home settings.
Very medicalized approach to dying in most cases. But I will say that if people have had one good experience with a loved one who was cared for, whether it was in the home or a nursing facility, sometimes in the hospital too, with hospice or good palliative care, when they've had that experience, they know what it can be like. And it can not only provide excellent relief of any suffering or symptoms that the patient is experiencing, it can also provide great emotional support, great spiritual care, and for families, it can help with a lot of the fear and stress of seeing a loved one go through the end stage of an illness. It's not going to necessarily relieve that grief. Grief is something we're going to go through.
Issue. Yeah.
We're going to be sad. We're going to want to keep that loved one of ours with us. But it will help them deal with the stress and the fear of what the end stage of an illness looks like. And then the other part of this is that we a lot of times talk about families needing to make have good time with their loved one before they pass from this life. We also know there are families who come to this stage of life with a patient where there are a lot of regrets, and maybe their relationships haven't been the way they wanted them. The end of life is a time when we see some families repair brokenness and ask for and give forgiveness, which can be life-changing and life-transforming at the end of life. So if the only thing we do at the end of life is attend to the medical, we've probably missed a big part of the needs for both the patient and the family.
Well, and again, that's a vision of holistic care that, of course, people in my profession have been, clamoring for a long, long time, because how do I say this? I guess the way I frame it a lot of times is to say, we know that ultimately, if you're a person of faith, you believe that God's going to fix things in the end anyway. Okay. Mm-hmm. But we want to make sure that we're doing all that we can. So sometimes people are not always going to get cured.
Right.
But we still hope and pray that they're going to experience the healing.
Absolutely.
You know, and that's again where we could get going on this whole idea of mercy and God's mercy, because some people would warrant to say, you know, how can God show mercy if he's going to let people die? And I'm just like, well, sometimes I think that's the most merciful thing that can happen for a person when they get to that point in life. They experience God's mercy and healing, even though they're not going to be cured.
Right. It can be. And, you know, physicians who have taken care of patients at the end of life often have asked, you know, what more could I do? What more could I offer? And that's when most of them recognize you really do need a team, because physicians recognize that there are limits to what medicine can do. And
probably more so than most people.
Right.
Because of how much they do for so many different patients.
Absolutely. We have a community now with a lot of medical students. Something that we haven't had in our community before last year.
Right.
So we have medical students too who are learning a lot about medicine, but also learning at the same time, where does medicine find its limit, and when I can no longer cure, I can still care, and I'll always continue to provide whatever healing we can, even if it's not healing of this illness or this injury.
And if you've got a doctor who thinks like that, hang on to him. Okay, I'm just going to say, hang on to that doctor, because that doctor is not only a fine scientist and practitioner, but he's also got the art of the medicine and the art of the healing that goes with that. Right. And that's an amazing thing when we get a chance to experience that at somebody's hands.
And no matter what discipline you work in within healthcare, a healthy dose of humility. About what we know and what we don't know about medicine, what we know and don't know about the human body, the human spirit. You know, we think we know our families. Most of us who work in healthcare have had the experience of caring for a loved one of our own, in addition to being healthcare professionals. So what you think you know about your family, you may not know.
Yeah.
So I think it's just finding the courage to speak about hard things.
Yeah. So one of those things that you mentioned, so you know, you can set some of this stuff up, and I would encourage you to have these conversations, because that's one of the most important things, is having this conversation with the people who are going to be helping to care for you. So not just your doctor, but your family and those who might have that durable, you know, power of attorney for healthcare issues.
Right.
So all of those things are important. So having those, you want to say something also maybe about advanced directives and those kinds of things?
Sure. Along with the durable power of attorney, a person can complete a healthcare directive, which is a reflection of your basic preferences about kinds of life-sustaining treatment that you would be open to or you would not wish to have. The important thing to know about a healthcare directive is that it's just a reflection of your preferences. But when those decisions have to be made, they really have to be made in the context of the current illness that we're really dealing with, the current medical condition. And it takes your appointed power of attorney or your loved ones in shared decision making with the physicians who know what's going on with you right now.
Yeah.
So,
and obviously, if you're still conscious and can be a part of that conversation, you will be.
Yes.
You know, because they can't. If you're still there, they can't be making decisions.
Yeah, patients
without
should always.
you. Yeah.
Right.
But that's if you were unconscious or something. Then you've at least had those things expressed in a way that everybody knows what it was that you were thinking, and the way you wanted to proceed.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And our Catholic tradition around issues of reasonable care and care of persons with advanced illness goes back 500 years or more. I mean, it's a long tradition that has really a lot of durability because it's principles that we still live by today and we still work within today. So,
yeah. And that's just in hospitals. I mean, obviously, even in the principles would go back even to the time, you know, at least, and again, this is pushing it because nothing was ever written down. But we believe those principles were handed to us by Jesus himself,
right.
You know, in terms of what he did and what he taught and all those kinds of things. So, I mean, you know, they don't say anything about, you know, if you look in the scriptures, they're going to say anything about end of life treatment. But what it is going to say is a lot of things about dignity, care, compassion.
Right.
all of those things.
Yeah, I mean, there are biblical roots, and then you look to the writings of Aquinas and some of the doctors of the church who actually gave us guidance that still stands up today. And then, you know, all of the time throughout medicine today, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops is constantly reviewing and revising guidance that the bishops give to Catholic healthcare facilities, as well as home care and long-term care facilities, to make us all mindful of and paying attention to those moral commitments that we make.
And again, for us, it's about moral commitments. And again, this, you know, our conversation here between two Catholics is going to have that Catholic flavor to it. But many of these same principles are obviously there at our other health institutions as well. We hold ourselves to a certain thing in Catholic healthcare. We hold ourselves to certain directives. But again, we certainly don't want to suggest that any of our other healing institutions out there would not be doing the same thing.
You find many of the same principles in non-faith-based types of settings as well. So,
yeah. Well, we're going to be right back after this Mercy Minute. Again, this is Faith in Our Hometown. Stick with us for our wrap-up.
Breast density is when you have more fibrous tissue and glandular tissue in your breast than fat. And so we are hearing more about dense breasts because, number one, it's a law that we tell women that they have dense breasts. We've known about dense breasts in the medical community for many years. But that's the difference. You know, there are some women who are have very fatty replaced breasts, and there are some women who have very dense breasts, meaning they have more fibroglandular tissue in that breast and less fat, therefore making it a little fuzzy on mammograms. So women with dense breasts have a modestly increased risk for breast cancer. However, it's not substantially increased. We have to just be more vigilant.
Well, again, thanks for joining us for another Sunday morning and for Faith in Our Hometown. This morning we've been talking about something that's going to affect every single one of our families, if it has not already affected every single one of our families. And that is, how do we care for those we love when the end of their life starts coming closer and closer, either due to illness or advanced age or whatever else is going to make us talk about those things at a given point in time. One of the things that we try to do is we try to do those things with our principles in mind, so that we're not just reacting when the time comes. We need to talk about those things ahead of time, and for anyone who's ill, and for all of us, it's probably a good idea to have those conversations long before we ever wind up in the hospital or at the end of life. But once we talk to each other, all of us who are involved on the other side, again, need to do what we can to treat our loved ones with dignity, care, respect, and allow them to make some of the choices that will enhance their living up until the very, very moment of their death. This is Faith in Our Hometown. Join us next week. Have a great Sunday.
Thanks for watching. Faith in Our Hometown can be seen Sunday mornings at 6:30 and 9 a.m. on KSN. Brought to you as a community service and sponsored by Mercy Hospital, Joplin.